Just go.
Double check.
It's
Okay,
going.
today is Thursday. He has to calm down. This is. I may have to move him. Today's Thursday, 10th of August, 2023. Continuing the book of John McHugh, The Forgotten Reapers of World War II, and we're picking up at chapter 30. The farmers. You can hear me okay, Dan?
Mm-hmm.
You can hear me all right? You hear me? Okay, all right. Come here. Come down. Okay. All right. Okay. So one day, trying to see if I can. One day, old Burr, the older farmer, took you and some of you to a local pub in the Elba area. So it says here, one evening Burr was taking us home when he suddenly pulled over and parked the pickup. He invited us into the nearby pub to have a drink. So we all four followed him in. There were three elderly men calmly smoking their pipes and sipping their beer as they chatted with the bartender. Burr took his pipe out of his mouth and ordered drinks all around for us. No, said the bartender. What the hell do you mean? Burr retorted. His reply was that some Jamaicans had come in some nights ago and nearly destroyed his place. Burr said, these fellows work with me and had nothing to do with that. Old Burr became real mad and said, come on, boys. As we left, he said to the men, you're lucky I don't smash you up. This brought a roar of laughter from us, and we went on our way. Now this one day you were working in the fields, and you all had to share the water together. And one day a party of you went to work with an Italian farmer and his hired local hands. It was the responsibility of all farmers to provide drinking water for their workers. On this particularly hot day, we observed the farmer had just one large jug, which he and his men all shared, passing it from one to the other. We were not used to this seemingly innocent custom, but cornered under severe circumstances for bodily survival is another matter. Out in the wilderness, under a severely hot sun and thirsty, there was no alternative but to follow suit. But when it was my turn to take my swill, I juggled some water through the washed spout, then put my lips inside instead of outside the spout, and had my drink. This communal approach to the water jug, however, was symbolic of the gregarious and good nature of the locals with whom we worked. Their temperament, however, was in stark contrast to that of a dour and devious farmer who, after having completed our work, shortchanged me and my companion after we went to help him in his time of need. You remember that? You went to help this farmer, and after finishing the work, he wouldn't pay you. So that's who you're talking about. Do you remember there was a lady called Mrs. Parker?
Yes.
Okay. The Farmers Association was not only comprised of men, but women also. There was one woman in particular, Mrs. Parker.
I remember Mrs. Parker.
Who came every day for her workers. Nearing the end of the season, one day went along with her workers to reap carrots on her farm. Although there was a feminine touch, there was a detectable toughness about her. She was a widow. Mrs. Parker. She was a widow. Hold on, Dad. Hold on a minute, Dad. Let me just pause this for a moment. She was a widow, and since the loss of her husband had carried on the farm by herself. The Jamaicans who were her helpers did not treat her politely, which piqued me. She, on the other hand, became accustomed to them and seemed to have taken it philosophically. Her crops had to be gathered. There was a war on. These were her only helpers, and good ones at that. The morning on her farm was bitterly cold, and before noon I felt ill and took leave of her to return to camp. Another worker also became ill and joined me. Of course, Mrs. Parker could not spare the time to drive us back to camp. The distance and the cold added to our misery, but we managed to reach camp and to bed for the rest of the day. On another occasion, I joined others to work on the farm of the president of the association. He was called Bunny. Remember that name, Bunny? A well-built man with a crew-cut appearance and the attitude of a taskmaster. When we arrived at his farm, his demeanor and presentation about some work that we thought was out of our category became a bone of contention. This situation required some calm, firm opposition on our part, of which the majority of us were just about to effect, when quick-tempered Ferren fired a salvo at Bunny and spoiled the moment. What the hell do you think? You think because we are black? Bunny, with quick and appropriate gesture, replied, "That never occurred to me." I privately censored Ferren for his mention of color. He was the typical Jamaican to take quick retaliatory offense at any semblance of racism. Nevertheless, it dulled and the calm's action warranted. The ultimate result was that at our request, Bunny took us back to camp. The day was spoiled. We had to pay for a day's food and lost a day's savings for Jamaica. Okay, the next thing, Dad, we go into the gypsum camp. This is when you went with Barrett for the first time for the camp. The brilliant summer of 1944 was over and the fall began to make itself felt. It was now almost the end of October, and as the mopping up continued on the farms, we started to look yonder to new paths. Our contract provided two options. One was that at the end of harvesting on the farms, those who wanted to return to Jamaica would be transferred to Camp Murphy in Florida. You heard the Camp Murphy. Okay. This camp was dreaded for its delays. Men would reach Camp Murphy from all over America on their way home. The other option was to remain in America for the duration of the war, with employment offered in the United States War Manpower Commission. A lot of men were afraid of the cold winter and wanted to go home. Alfred Ferdy and I were among the ones that stayed. Our decision, however, was to be a courageous one. The first and only announcement came that there was a gypsum mining company at nearby Oakfield, 4 miles west of Elba, that wanted men to work in their mines. This became immediately unacceptable. No one had ever contemplated going down into the bowels of the earth to mine gypsum. To Jamaicans, this was a strange matter. We knew of the coal mines in England and Wales, having read about them from school days. But to work in a mine? No, no way.
Oh, that me disremember.
That's right. So now, it was on a Wednesday, the 25th of October, a party of you filled 2 buses sent by the United Gypsum Company to make the trip to Oakfield so you could go see what the mine was going to look like. Okay, so now, on the 25th of October, 1944, you went to the Gypsum Company, the United States Gypsum Company mine. And this is a tour buses took you there. And you went into the pit, and you said that you were fitted with miners' caps and lamps, and you descended into the elevator into the bowels of the earth to explore what was regarded one of the largest gypsum mines in the world.
Gypsum.
Gypsum, yes. We were placed in linked trolley cars, 4 to a car, and sped away at 15 miles per hour to a distance of near That's coming. I'm coming. I'm going to show you in a minute. 2 miles down. We went 2 miles down. The grotesque appearance of the narrow tunnels as we sped our way along the fast-moving trolley gave us the creeps. Now, you'll see in a moment. When the tour was over and we came up to see the sky again, the official guides were very kind to us. We returned to Elba that night with a new experience and deep admiration for the courage of the men who eke their living out of the bowels of the earth. The tour, however, did something to us, the evidence of which was shown a few nights later. Remember, so Ed DeWitt.
Yes,
Right.
do it.
When Ed DeWitt stood on a chair in the mess hall to sign up those who were willing to work for the Gypsum Company. There was practically the whole camp cramming the mess hall, those eager to remain in the United States and those slated to go home, but curious. The difficult decision still rankled. The mine was still fearfully unacceptable, but the desire to remain longer in the States was nagging. It was a matter of between the devil and the deep blue sea. Ed waited patiently for the hesitant volunteers to recruit. Like an inspirational spark, Alfred stepped forward and said, "I will sign." And that's Alfred Barrett. Immediately, men who were suffering from indecision a moment before followed suit, and the Gypsum Company had its complement of men for the mine. If this was the first time the Jamaicans went to work in a mine, then Alfred Barrett must go down in history as the first Jamaican to have led the way. So that's Alfred Barrett there. That's his
Yes, that's
picture.
the MC.
Yeah.
Let me know about that mine business.
Yes, that's right. So he'd be the first one to go down. Now, above ground, attached to the mine, was a paper factory.
Yes.
I was advised earlier, along with some others, when we went on the tour, that my height would be better served in the factory than underground. Fortunately, because you were tall, they wanted shorter people in the mine, but they wanted taller people working in the factory. So, because of your height, you didn't have to go work in the mine. They assigned you to the paper factory because you were tall. Again, that providential hand. The request of men now to fill the factory became a scramble for the limited number required, because working in the factory was preferred, the favorite place to go. So eventually you went to work in the paper factory, and then, I don't know if you can see this picture here, this is where you would go to eat the meals each night. This was the place you went to. I can show that here. And I circled in red where the gong was, when they would ring the gong for you to come to the meals. They'd knock that gong, and you would listen to the gong, and you would come to the meals. So that red circle is where the gong is in the picture. The Oakfield Historical Society sends us this picture.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting memory. Oh my.
So the 1st of November 1944 was the last day at Elba before you went to work in the Gypsum Company. So 1st of November 1944 was our last day at Elba Labor Camp. It was then that we felt the first signs for the coming winter. The morning was so cold, one that I had not experienced. I went to say goodbye to Mr. Morgan, and he wrote in my autograph book, "Here is to a good, honest worker, signed Bill Morgan."
Oh my God. Oh, Lord, I just remember that.
I never saw him again. Among the men who left for home, Duncan and Ferron laughingly quipped at Ferdy and me, "The winter is going to bust you. I'm following the Swallows back home." Bing Barnett, our cabin mate, also left for Jamaica.
Oh my bonnet.
So it was Ferdy, Alfred, and myself, still together, who now joined the Gibson Company. About 75 of you joined the company, and the company provided for us in a large housing complex with central heating and all the required amenities. Evelyn Ellis and the kitchen staff, they came and they were your chef. We were now a smaller crowd, more compact, and felt satisfied with Ellis and his staff, rather than have to put up with Slim, who seemingly
Oh, God.
simply disappeared. Ellis stayed in his post as head chef at Oakfield for some time after the war. You later learned that he had died and was taken to New York City for burial.
Who that died?
Evelyn Ellis.
Oh,
Ellis,
yes.
the cook. The cook. Yeah. This is the back of the mess hall where you would eat. This is the building you were in. Okay.
Evelyn
Right.
Ellis.
Then you go on to describe how the paper factory was ready, and this is another interesting event that occurred. Now you're arriving for the first time at the paper factory. When our group got to the factory, we were met by the manager. The manager's first words to us were, "What kind of education you fellas have received?"
That's right, that's right. I remember that.
The shock of this question left everyone speechless for a moment. I spoke up and was about to explain our system of education in Jamaica, but before I finished my first word, the manager said to his deputy, "Take that man."
That's right. That's right. Oh, God. I remember it so well.
"Take that man to the roller room." He wished us well and left. No more was said. Hold on, Dad.
All these things I remember so well. Oh, God. Before, I remember looking and spoke up. Oh, my.
That's right.
Oh, my.
That was the trick. You spoke up. Okay. Okay, good. We're recording.
Oh,
Yes.
my.
On your arrival in the roller room after you got sent by making that statement, I realized how lucky I was. Excuse me. I realized how lucky I was. There, I was sheltered from the winter, being inside, and the workers in the beater room, where they beat up the gypsum, I guess, were more exposed to the elements, whereas you were further inside. I joined American workers, among them a colored American from the South named Ree Austin.
Austin.
Became a good friend. Not to be confused with the Ray from the days of Elba. So you had a Ray who worked at Elba, and you had Ree Austin who worked in the paper factory. Ree was a big man of about 50 years of age and a good singer, living with his family in the vicinity. He took a liking to me as a kind of father figure, and we became good friends. At the paper factory, our group was soon divided into shifts, and I became one of three in our shift. The shifts were 7 to 3, 7 in the morning to 3 p.m., then to 11 p.m., and then to 7 a.m. Mine was the graveyard shift, 11 to 7. My fellow Jamaicans were James Lambert. Remember James Lambert? Of my hometown, a saddle maker, a good worker. Money Brown.
Money Brown.
I remember him as a good sport and his being quite the character. The nickname Money came from his being always the bookie at gambling events in camp. Now we come to Christmas. And this is Christmas of 1944 now.
1944, imagine.
1944. Christmas was drawing closer, and I did not have a winter coat. This is when you ask your uncle to send you a winter coat from New York. And I wondered why my uncle in New York City, who I knew had several coats, had not thought of sending me one. So I devised a strategy. I wrote him to advise me as to whether he thought it to my advantage to acquire a light coat instead of a heavy and more expensive one, seeing I'd be just using it for one winter in America. I waited for his reply. I felt sure he would not recommend the light coat and would be moved to provide me with what I considered something that I could ill afford with a proper coat. You did not hear from your uncle for several days, and Christmas is coming up and everyone's preparing to go on a Christmas trip. You don't have your coat. I anxiously awaited my uncle's reply, which eventually came. Up to Saturday evening, which was the 23rd of December, I went off to work, and I still had not received my coat. I came from work on that Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, but still no coat. So now you're getting very anxious. Suddenly I heard my name called. It was Mr. Green, the company's paymaster, handing me a package saying he got it for me and had rushed to deliver it right away. It was my lovely winter coat, a perfect fit.
Oh, God.
Yep. So it came just in time. Just in time.
Lord Jesus.
So you went off to Rochester, the nation's optical capital. You arrived at 11:30 in the morning, and many Jamaicans were there, and you received great hospitality. Alfred, always the contact man, suggested we attend a Christmas night service. So we went to a Father Brown's Roman Catholic church where the snowplow dug a way for the congregation to enter the church. It was around 1:30 in the morning, and we finally went to bed. You also went to see the film Kismet with Ronald Colman and Marlene Dietrich.
That's right.
And you were staying, there was a guest who looked after you, so you were able to go out, and then you spent the night there. You then also went to see Something for the Boys, starring Carmen Miranda and Michael O'Shea. And the other film was The Falcon in Hollywood. Alfred had it all worked out. After the show, we were invited to the home for Christmas dinner. We entered the home of a lovely home owned by a beautiful American colored lady about the age of 40. She was either widowed or divorced, but as we soon discovered, was under the dominance of a Jamaican living with her in the house. This man was a contracted war worker as ourselves, but working in the city where, owing to the war, there were lots of lonely women seeking companionship. Apparently this was such a case. This seemingly good-natured woman demurely tolerated the boasting of this man's exploits as he explained his life in Jamaica. I glanced at the woman's face to see a hint of disgust. In her lovely sitting room, she invited us to be seated. She might have looked docile, but not unintelligent and discerning. As we sat, she requested of me to sit at the head of the table. I felt some embarrassment at this open request, seeing she had just met me in the past few hours, just 2 hours before. She insisted, saying I was the biggest in the group and I should do so. I might have been the biggest, but what she did not know was that I was the youngest. "He is the baby," Alfred said. I sat at the head of the table and said the grace. She seemed satisfied. At the end of the meal, we soon learned, however, that this was not Jamaican hospitality as we knew it in Jamaica. The meal had to be paid for, and we conformed, as one of the boys collected from each of us to pay the cost. When we were leaving and bidding the woman adieu, she expressed regret that there was not able to provide any female companionship for us. You then returned to Oakfield that night. Then you had a snowstorm. On the 5th of January, 1945, you and a friend thought you could walk the distance to the factory, and Bill Morgan offered to give you a ride, I think, but you said no. There were a number of snowstorms. I think there was another one with him. In this one, you were blinded by the terrific sweep of snow, and you lost your way. You could not even see posts to know your way. There was nothing to do but pray for the storm to subside. So you finally got to the factory, but there was nobody there because it was so much snow. But then you found your way and you had to struggle all the way back. So that was your experience in snow. You then go on to describe how the paper was made. And you go into good detail of how they would cut the paper into 10-foot to 12-foot lengths, 4-foot wide, and how you'd split the paper and it would be loaded to be taken away. And you were assigned to a specific machine. Like Elba, Oakfield too had its share of clashes between management and labor. These clashes were often the result of cultural misunderstanding. One such incident occurred on a Sunday morning after breakfast when the men were relaxing in our day of rest. Someone was playing the piano. At the time, I was indisposed and was ordered by the doctor to stay in. Big Bill Daniels.
Big Daniels.
Mm-hmm. He was the manager. Big Bill, who had driven over from Oakfield, entered the hall in a raging temper and started to address us. You men were requested to go out to work today. And while our boys are dying over there, you are here sitting on your behinds.
No.
He did not get much further. A chorus of voices retaliated immediately. Do you think it's only your boys dying over there? And besides, we are here gathering your crops and helping with the war effort. Big Bill was stopped in his tracks and felt uncomfortable, but simmered down when he crossed.
No.
I tried to get a picture of him, but they didn't have pictures of the management. But I asked if there was one. Big Bill was stopped in his tracks and felt uncomfortable, but simmered down when he grasped the reason why the men were reluctant to work on a Sunday. It's being a church day. But it wasn't quite over as yet. Still in a rage, he looked around when he caught sight of me in a far corner. And why are you not gone to work? He said this to you. Now he had barked up the wrong tree. Big Bill was the president of the company, was known to be feared. My blood boiled at his dictatorial attitude, and I replied to him in like manner. I made him to understand that I was not well, and no powers would get me to go out to work. My condition he apparently did not know and halted in his attack. I further continued, Mr. Daniels, what is the opinion of me as a worker at the mill? He answered, a very good one, I am told. I waited for no more response and left the room to go to bed.
Oh, boy.
Yes. So now, the following morning, a Monday, I felt well enough to go to work. On my return that evening, while chatting with the boys, Daniels, Big Bill, suddenly came through the back door and asked me to come with him. We both went to the front porch. In a kindly manner, he asked me to forget the incident yesterday and asked whether I would consider renewing my contract with the company. I thanked him graciously for his kind request, but informed him that I decided to return home. He appeared cast down at my reply, but we both respected each other and accepted the situation. Faced with the prospect of having to eventually leave America, there were some who found a pretext to skip the contract and to simply disappear over America. At Elba, there was the case of Teacher. That was his nickname. He was an auto mechanic by trade. After 3 weeks' arrival at Elba, He had been conveyed in a truck and suffered a broken arm. He was attended by the doctor and unable to work. Teacher never returned to the farm, was never seen again in Elba. Rumor had it that he had secured an attorney and brought a lawsuit against the farmer. The last we heard was that he had gone to work in his trade in one of the large cities. Whatever course he had taken, whatever courses he and his attorney had taken, seemed to have prevented the authorities from touching him. I was now in the country many months. You spent about 5 months between Elba. You started in Elba. You worked at Elba for 5 months, and then you worked about 3 months with the gypsum company. Now in the country many months, I had enough of the cold and practically no social life where we were. I knew there were thousands of jobs to be filled in this country at war. I had made up my mind not to renew my contract at Oakfield, and if there was no other opportunity, return to Jamaica. But I had no intention of violating my contract. I longed to return to New York City and thought there would be the possibility of procuring a job there. The end of my contract with the company was drawing close, so I launched my plan. My thoughts ran upon Ed DeWitt. Since leaving Elba, Ed was out of our lives, and I had never seen him since. So on our day off, Lambert accompanied me to Batavia, where I went to look up Ed in his office. He was delighted to see us. He was with him was another gentleman from New York City, another official. Both listened intently to what I had to say. I wanted Ed's governmental advice on my plan about going to New York, and he said, I felt a bit, he looked at us and said, the visiting official who was with him listened with interest and answered and said the authorities were discouraging Jamaicans from going to New York City, for it was the desire of everyone to go there. We rarely saw his point, but we felt cast down. But Ed gave me a hint. He said, whatever you do, always report and never break the law. We said pleasant goodbyes. I never saw Ed DeWitt again. Lambert and I...
Ed DeWitt.
Ed DeWitt.
Oh. Oh my God. Ed DeWitt.
So this now is going to be the result of what happened after meeting with Ed. So after meeting with Ed DeWitt, you and Lambert now return to the camp, to Oakfield. Now you go back to Oakfield. So shortly after your visit, an incident took place, which possibly could have derailed your plans. There was a rankling for some time at the paper factory between the night shift and the management about the time we received our pay. Complaints were lodged, but no notice was taken. So on this particular week, a shutdown was planned. So you're going to go on strike. This would have been my shift had I been at work. However, that very week I became ill and developed a fever and had to stay in bed. Again, more divine providence that caused this to happen. Otherwise, I would certainly have been caught up in what followed, because in theory, I supported the complaints. At Oakfield, we were in an open floor housing unit where we slept in individual cots inside of each other. The entire incident unfolded before me as I lay sick in my bed. Lambert and Money Brown made their protest by not reporting for the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift. Their absence immediately caused a stir, and telephone lines started to ring. When it was learned that at the factory of their protest, Big Bill Daniels was notified. He was infuriated and shortly appeared at the housing unit with 2 state troopers. The troopers were smartly attired in their gray winter uniforms and Sam Brown belts diagonally across their shoulders, bearing the weight of their revolvers. They tried to persuade Lambert and Brown to go to work. After several attempts, they warned that the alternative was that the boys would have to leave by train for Florida. Daniels was determined at this, as he stood in a corner of the room hoping the 2 men would go out to work. Lambert and Brown not only remained adamant, but were now joined by the rest of the men, all of whom had just returned from their day's work in the mine. They bombarded the troopers and shouted that if the threat was carried out, that they all would pull out with them to Florida. The situation now became ugly, and Daniels and the two troopers seemed bewildered as to what action to take. To the credit of the troopers, however, they remained calm throughout the situation. Some of the men were even now going to bed. This is like 11, 12 o'clock at night now. It became evident that the troopers had to instill the law, and now, well past the time the men should have gone to work. Lambert and Money Brown now had to pack their grips. It was with a touch of sadness that these two men, who I'd worked with these past months, came to my bedside at 1 o'clock in the morning to say goodbye. They left in the quiet of the night with the two patient troopers, who had spent over 8 hours there performing their duty. They escorted them on the train to Batavia, bought their tickets, and saw them on their way to Camp Murphy. The unfortunate but unforgettable incident, however, could not have been, and that I could not have been involved, and that I was not involved, sealed my decision of the action I was to take in a few weeks. So you were fortunate that you were sick that day. And it so happened I was due 7 days leave. So prior to the close of my contract, I went to Daniels and explained I wanted to visit and take leave of my relatives in New York City, as I might not have a chance to see them again. So now you get the opportunity now to go to New York. And he signs your leave slip for 7 days, but you're not coming back.
So memorable to me.
So now you arrive in New York, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And Ferdy Gruber had given you an address of someone to see in New York.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And when you got there, you were met by Mrs. Graham.
That's right.
And you found out that there was a possibility of working at the Delwood Dairies.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. So while you were waiting there, the person who was going to take you was a man called Hart. He was the man who took you and introduced you to work at the dairy. But along the way, you met. Let's get this right. The lady, she said, Mrs. Graham said, "Are you related to one Leslie McHugh? Leslie M." She said, "Are you related to one Leslie M?" "That is my brother," you said. To which she replied, he lives downstairs at the same house.
Oh my God.
That Ferdy had told you to go to. You didn't even know this, that your brother Leslie was living there. You never knew this. Would you like to meet him? Oh, well, of course you would want to meet him. So she said that Hart, the person you went there to see, he was out working. So while you were waiting for him, she then arranged for you to meet your half-brother. He was the first child born before your father's marriage to your mother, who was his second marriage. Leslie had left Jamaica quite young and lived most of his life in America. I returned later that night and was waiting to arrange to see my brother. So he welcomes you in. I entered the sitting room and I noted that there was a man immaculately dressed, wearing glasses, and two ladies sitting with him. After about 7 minutes, she had not returned. You were just sitting there with these people. I thought it strange that she had not introduced me to these people. So I thought that they were maybe some friends of hers that she wanted me to meet. She now comes back into the sitting room and she says, and you ask her, says, "Are you going to take me to see my brother?" And with a casual wave of her hand, she said, That's your brother.
No. Oh man, to hear you sing over again.
Mm-hmm.
Quite true. Oh God,
That's your brother.
that's your brother. I never forget that. She had me waiting. That's your brother.
That's your
Lord of
brother.
mercy.
And then he said, you went down to his apartment and you told him about his brother and his father, all his brother and his father, and he gave him all the information about Herbert and your sisters. He in turn told me about David, a cousin of your father's.
Oh God.
Okay.
Oh, no waking time of my life.
It was
Oh,
quite
God.
a wonderful time, man. He then told you about David. You asked him about David, who had returned on a visit to Jamaica years ago when you were 11 years of age. David was your first cousin once removed. Okay? I knew he was still alive and somewhere in the city. I will take you to him now, Leslie said. So that same night, Leslie said, I'm going to take you to meet David. You get on you go to Manhattan Avenue at 116th Street, and you're boarding a bus. And the moment you get on the bus, Leslie recognizes a woman sitting on the bus who's David's wife.
Oh, God.
Now imagine that coincidence. How big a coincidence is that? You both, all of you travel on, now you're with David's wife on this bus, never met her before, and Leslie, they're on the bus with you. She now gets off and you get off and follow her now. So she's wondering, who is this person? Who's this person with Leslie? And so when you get to the house, she opens the door, and Dave, who was already home, saw Leslie and said, what brings you here, stranger? And who could this young man be? Then Leslie made his announcement, meet my brother John, at which pandemonium broke loose. Dave, with his famous smile, exclaimed in awe, John, my little cousin, I saw so many years ago in Jamaica.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
Yes, that was the beginning.
I'm reliving this situation in my life.
I learned from these two of the other cousins living around the city. Cousins I'd only heard of by name. Children of my father's brother, George, who was lost at sea. 3 boys and 2 girls, who all except for one, called Joseph. Joseph went to Canada to join the Canadian Army, living in New York City. They, like Leslie, had migrated to the United States in the early years. However, they seem to have drifted apart over time. Dave, however, was the one that kept tags on them. So then you go on to meet various people, meeting these people.
Great. Thank you for reading it to me, Michael. Oh, my.
And then you went and got the job at the dairy, and you were hired immediately. You went back, the man Hart, he took you to the dairy, and the boss on the spot. He needed workers so badly that he took you right on the spot to work. I had never seen a mechanized dairy before. You would envision that you're going to see cows. There were no cows. The only evidence of cows was the mechanized works where the milk was stored in huge tankers, parked alongside to convey the milkman in the modern spacious building. I quickly learned my job. Along the conveyor system, the bottles were automatically filled, covered and tied with a wire at the neck, to be picked up by hand and placed in crates, to be conveyed to the waiting city for delivery the next morning. On reporting for work each night, the worker would find in his locker a clean white overall placed there for him to wear. Several times I found my overalls too small and had to squeeze into them. The laundryman who put them there during the day had never seen the men and just placed them in each locker at random. I got the copy of your pay stubs in your book, so we were able to put these in, and we were able to calculate how much you worked and how long you were there just from these pay stubs. Is very helpful. The job was arduous. I returned to my uncle's home in the Bronx. I traveled across town, and you connected to a place called Getty's Corner.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It was the return part of the journey. I managed to work this out by getting a lift in one of the milk vans that would leave every morning at 4 o'clock. And you recall seeing an old lady wrapped. It was so cold you had to use newspaper to wrap your legs to keep warm in the van. The kindly driver would drop me off at the train station. I can remember the little old lady huddled up upon the train, beating her hands and feet to keep warm. This was the time the city was coming to life, and when more people were boarding the train, it was a relief when the doors closed and we were off. During the first week at the dairy, one bitterly cold morning after I'd fought my way down the stairs, the train stairs, I felt sick, but braced myself to walk the few blocks home. Hungry and cold, I fought the feeling of passing out on the street. However, I reached home to the warmth of my Aunt Muriel's kind attention. She was one of the kindest human beings I have ever encountered in my life. I never saw her sad or discouraged, but always ready to help and give an encouraging word. It so happened that on the very evening my uncle came. Normally your uncle was at work when you were coming home, and when you were going to work, he was coming home, so you didn't see each other. But it just so happened one night that you did bump into each other, and except on that particular evening, your uncle came home early to find you sleeping in his bed, because Muriel said, "Okay,
That's
you're tired."
right. I never forget that.
You were tired, so well, you can sleep in his bed for now. Well, when he got home, he found you sitting in the bed, so he wasn't too pleased about that, right? His facial expression was not pleased, and I heard him muttering to my aunt that this was not a healthy situation.
That's right. I hear him now.
Upon this interchange, something clicked inside me, and my independent determination sprang to the fore. As I reflected on what I had heard, they didn't know you heard the conversation, but you overheard it. However justified my uncle might have been in his reaction, his overall attitude was in stark contrast to that of his wife and her daughter Marguerite, who understood the strain and stress a youngster was undergoing first time away from his country and trying to adjust in the fastest and busiest city in the world. I felt allegiance to my uncle as my mother's brother and had all the respect for him, but then I reflected on the case of the almost late coat, his discouraging me at my plan to come to New York, his advising me to return to Oakfield. With all these thoughts swirling in my mind, I resolved not to allow such a circumstance to ever happen again. Then you went to work later in some instances that happened on the job. How an Italian dairy worker dropped dead at work because he had worked too much overtime. He collapsed of a heart attack. So much work to be done. And then you arranged with Aunt Muriel to pay rent. She wouldn't accept it, but you said, "No, I got to pay rent got to pay my keep." So now, here's your plan now to try to stay in New York City, Dad. After 2 weeks at the dairy, I came home from work in the morning. So, okay, you had sent a letter to Lausanne in Ithaca about transferring. You wanted to transfer. And you received a letter back now. And the letter, the letter says, "We wish to acknowledge your letter of January 30th relative to your interest in working at the Delwood Dairy. However, it goes on to say, you will recall that you were transferred to the Gibson Company, and as a result of that, you now became under the Manpower Commission. So they couldn't take you back into the War Food, the Food Commission. So anyway, he says, inasmuch as you are now you are now in New York, go to Mr. George Hutchison at the War Manpower Commission at 44 East 23rd Street in New York City, and he will advise you what procedures to take. Hold on, Dad. Okay. At the present time, we are not able to accept you back into agricultural service. We hope that you will take immediate steps concerning the above so as to prevent possible difficulties with the immigration authorities. Very truly yours, Nelson Hopper. So now, let's see what happens next. So you take the letter, you go to 20, this is the copy of the letter. I have the letter here that you received, telling you where in the envelope. You now take this letter in hand, and now you're going to this Mr. Hutchison in New York City. I wasted no time. You had the letter, you took it right in hand. You got the letter that morning, you took it the same day, you wasted no time, and you got on the subway. When you got to the office of Mr. Hutchison, you were told that he was not there. But his deputy, a Mr. Campbell, would see you. So the secretary ushered you into the office, and sitting at the desk was a man who appeared by estimation to be tall, but serious looking, but look kind. He greeted me cordially and asked what could he do for me. Here, I now realized, was the crucial moment of my plan. If I failed, it would be goodbye to New York City. I told him my position and my desire. He listened patiently to the end, then looked me straight in the eye and said, Mr. McHugh, there is no other alternative but for you to return to Oakfield or to go to Camp Murphy and go back to Jamaica. Thoughts flashed to mind. My 7 days were up and I had not returned to Oakfield. Could Daniels have sensed something and tried to block me, even although I was no longer under contract with his company? Or could it be Mr. Campbell was stalling the attempts of others who had similar intentions as mine? I decided to make my bold stand. Spontaneously, I played my hand. Mr. Campbell, I said, I have no intention of returning to Oakfield. It is too cold for my health, and I have no intention of going to Camp Murphy in Florida. He looked at me.
What?
Okay. He looked at me in surprised indignation. After a pause, I looked him in the eye, and stamping my fist on his desk, I simultaneously thundered, Do you know why? Because I want to help Uncle Sam win the war. Mr. Campbell smiled and said to me, Mr. McHugh, wait outside a while. I never saw Mr. Campbell again. While I waited in the outer room, a smiling, tall young lady came out and called my name. I rose from my seat and she invited me into her office. She was Mr. Campbell's secretary. Sir, she said, take the Queen's train and go to Long Island to the National Sugar Refining Company. Ask for Mr. Lamar.
Yes, Lamar. Mr. Lamar.
Give him this letter. You will be one of the first of a batch of Jamaicans to start working there. Within, I was overjoyed. I couldn't believe my ears. I now had official permission to work in the city of my choice. How are you for money, she asked. Do you have enough to get to Long Island? I said, no, I'll be okay. That night I went to work at the dairy, because now you're going to give them notice at the dairy now. But your employer wasn't happy when you told him that you now were leaving. He was very short of workers. He needed people. The oak field experience was now behind me. A humorous recollection from that time was of two men who didn't from the inner parts of Jamaica, who the rural parts of Jamaica, who were accustomed to walking in tropical weather, thought they would just walk home from the camp. But they had forgotten that they were in North America. They thought it was just a casual walk, but by the time they got back to the camp, their mustaches were all frozen over with snow. And Ellis, the chef, said, "Get them in the kitchen and thaw them out." My God, ice has formed in the man's mustache. Anyway, they recovered. Then you explain how the sugar was processed. So you go into a good explanation of how it came the molasses and how it was granulated into the white sugar. You explain all of that. You explain also the first day you arrived at the factory. The name of the sugar, the brand was called Jack Frost. That was the brand of the sugar. This is your badge that you wore. This was your National Sugar Refining Company badge.
1929.
That was the number on your badge that you wore as a worker, your worker's identification. You see that okay? See it? Yeah. Right.
Oh, thank you, Michael. God Spirit to read this letter for me. Every Jamaican should have get a book. Not only Jamaica.
Yeah.
Oh, well read, well read.
My surprise was to find, with the exception of two American colored women from the South, that the foreman, who was Polish, a quiet old gentleman who, despite his years in America, never mastered the English language. All the operators were men from the West Indies. These were mostly men between the ages of 40 to 60 who had migrated to the United States years before from such places as Barbados, Martinique, and St. Thomas. The assistant foreman was from Grenada, and there was a Jamaican named Scott.
Name what?
Scott.
Scott.
Yes, you'll remember. He was the soldier. He was a Jamaican working alongside you, who, by astounding coincidence, told me he had known my father years ago in Cuba.
Johnson. Oh, God.
Before you were born.
Yes.
Now, to imagine that coincidence, that's quite a coincidence. And how your father told him he didn't like his time there. These older men, when they heard of my coming from Jamaica under contract to assist with the war effort, were intrigued and saw me as a fresh young man from the islands, untainted by anything American. And so I was exciting to them. I was assigned to one of the operators for him to teach me to run the machines. My teacher was from Nassau in the Bahamas. I spent 2 weeks with him. At the end of this period, I was given my own machine to operate. They were situated next to his machine so he could keep an eye on me. And then you explain the various characters of the people you worked with, their history, and what it was like working with them, and how you managed to commute. You would take the 7th Avenue train to Times Square, then you take the shuttle to Grand Central Station, then to Lexington Avenue at 241st Street to White Plains. Drops you off in Grand Central on the east side. You would take the train to Flushing over to Vernon Jackson, and then you'd be at work, and then back same way trip back to the Bronx. I emerged into the life of the city so much that at times I had to remind myself that I was only here temporarily. With this in mind, I became a man in a hurry. All the places I'd read and heard about. Now you wanted to see all these great things. Living in New York City at the time, it was hard to imagine that there was a savage war being fought elsewhere. Unlike countries in Europe and Asia, I never saw trains bearing the wounded. Nevertheless, the undercurrent of the war was left in homes throughout America. These undercurrents hit in Granny's home. At the beginning of America's entry into the war, she had lost her firstborn son of her first marriage in an explosion on the ship he was serving in the San Francisco harbor. Her last son of her present marriage was in the Marines, serving in the Pacific. Her granddaughter, Marguerite's husband, was working in the forces in Europe, was serving with the forces in Europe. Whenever there was news of a big battle at the front, as the invasion forces advanced, Marguerite would take to her bed.
Oh, God.
Yeah. One night you were waiting for the train, 12 o'clock at night. A white American came and sat beside me. He just started to pour out his heart to me. He had just visited his relatives, where his nephew, a Marine, had returned from the Aleutian Islands. This lovely young man, whom he had held in his arms as a child, just looked at him and could not utter a word. He had been struck down by the shock and ravages of war. Seeing his nephew in this condition had a devastating effect on the man. I listened patiently to his story and offered words of comfort. My train came along, and so we parted. A few weeks after I met my brother, they went for a party, and you went out dancing. He was getting married. He had his marriage, and you went to his marriage. He asked you to speak at his wedding, so you spoke at his wedding, and then afterwards, you had an event that evening. Let's see how this happened here. So you arrange to go to a specific place after this event, and there were two female friends of David's and so forth that went with you. So the three of you went, and you go to the bar. So you went to the bar to get something for them, when you felt a light tap on your shoulder. See if you can remember this incident. So you're going dancing. You already have your two friends. You go to the bar. A light tap on your shoulder. I spun round to see the smiling woman, the smiling eyes of a woman, who whispered in my ear in a soft Jamaican accent. You are Jamaican, aren't you? Yes, I replied. How do you know? It's just how you dance, she said. Will you dance with me? So the music strikes up. How could you refuse? You had to dance with this lady. You were trapped. So away you went on the floor. And then you're looking in the corner of your eye, and your two friends are sitting at the table, quite upset. Who's this woman dancing with you? And they're there to dance with you. I saw the consternation on the faces of the women. As we danced, we talked and learned she was from a well-known family in Jamaica and was on a visit in the United States. At the end of the dance, she said, "Let's dance again." I knew this could not go on. She well knew that I had come with my friends, and they were sitting waiting at the table, because she had been obviously watching all along to know who you were, right? Mm-hmm. I politely told her I had to return to my friends, so we parted. When I got back to my three friends at the table, I guess there were three, I naturally explained what had happened. They were seething underneath and muttered, "What a cheek," as they gave savage glances at the lady across the room. Anyway, we went on to enjoy the evening. This incident, however, culminated in Jamaica about 3 years later. I was attending a charity ball one night at my hometown in St. Anne's Bay. A party of folks from Kingston came down for the event, and I immediately recognized the same lady who had been dancing with you at this event 3 years before, right?
Right.
I approached her with all goodwill to renew acquaintance and reminded her of our meeting in Brooklyn. She looked at me strangely. I quickly assumed her thoughts and said, "Nice to see you again," and beat a hasty retreat, barely avoiding an imminent brush-off. I doubt she had forgotten the rejection of her request for that second dance, and maybe she was with somebody at that second meeting, and that to acknowledge me would have been an embarrassment. I never encountered the lady again. Then you go on to describe Presidents Roosevelt, Prime Minister Churchill, and how the United States comes into the war, and then ultimately Truman. President Roosevelt, like Moses, was not to taste the promised land of victory. He had led the nation through critical years and on the verge of victory was cut off. It now fell to his successor, Harry Truman, to become the Joshua to lead the nation the rest of the way. You then go on to describe how you went to see Lena Horne at the Capitol Theater.
That's right, Lena Horne.
Xavier Cugat and his Latin American band. Robert Walker, who was a young actor coming to the fore at the time.
Wonderful.
You went to see the picture of Dorian Gray. Then you talk about when your uncle met his friend and how they went at each other. During the period of my work and travel, my uncle's character was further, this is Uncle Jocelyn, was further unfolded to me. As mentioned before, he was the image of his father. He walked and talked and had the same mannerism. My grandfather was a stickler for discipline, and so was my uncle. One Saturday morning, while he and my aunt were relaxing, his brother-in-law, Muriel's sister's husband, paid us a visit. The two men greeted each other cordially and started to converse. No sooner than that they started, a heated contention developed over what seemed to me trivial. It seemed so severe at times that I thought they were going at each other's throats. His rival now started to goad and lambast him, saying he was cheap and didn't spend enough money on his nephew out of town. This infuriated my uncle, and he retaliated hotly. In the meantime, I observed that my aunt paid them no mind and went about her business, making the meal. When she called us to the table, the two men sat down, still arguing, but simmered down and started to laugh. When our visitor left, my aunt informed me that whenever these two met, this was how they went on with each other. My uncle was far from being cheap, but not wanting to take me around town. He took me on a long tour of the city. He also Bronx Zoo. He took you to, and you explain how various places you went. And then you explained Frank Buck. Remember the name Frank Buck? He had caught a rhinoceros. And the rhinoceros, they had taken part of the horn. And you wanted to see if that rhinoceros still existed. And you found that rhinoceros. Frank Buck wrote a book called Bring 'Em Back Alive. He was a famous animal catcher, Frank Buck.
Bring it back alive.
And you describe your visit to the zoo and The Gift of Pandas by Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
Madame what?
Chiang Kai-shek.
Oh, the Chinese woman. Madame Chiang Kai-shek.
And you said, one day my uncle asked me what was my impression of America. I told him that the United States was a great country and that one day I was sure there would be a black president in the USA.
That's right. The black president.
And that all he had to do was not think of himself as black or white, but rather as a human being in relationship to other human beings. Then see if you can remember this incident. Do you remember the name Una?
That name what?
Una. I'll read it to you.
Greta?
Una. She was a friend of Marguerite. So Marguerite and her friend Una came to visit. You may not remember the name, but they came to visit. And Una's umbrella was not working. So you offered to fix the umbrella for her. So you took the umbrella, you soon found the trouble and fixed the umbrella. However, she really had come to visit Marguerite, so you were left alone with Una, and Marguerite lived across the hall from her mother, right? So you're now in Marguerite's apartment with this friend of hers called Una. You just fixed her umbrella. Marguerite leaves you alone with her while she goes across the hall to her mother. So shortly after, my aunt asked me to take something over for Marguerite. So you're now in the apartment. So Marguerite smilingly turned to you and say, "John, Una thinks what you did was very sweet to have fixed her umbrella. What would you like for pay?" I said, "For pay? Nothing. I don't want anything for pay." "Yes," says Una, "you must want something. What do you want?" I said, "Nothing." I said, "I don't need anything." "Well, you must want something." I said, No. Our conversation went on to something else. Marguerite left us to attend her child in the adjoining room, and quickly Una was on her feet beside me, whispering in my ear, "You must want something for pay." We were all young. I seemed to be the youngest, if not in age, then in experience. Marguerite called us to join her, where we were talking for a while. The rain continued to pour. Then it was time for Una to go. Her umbrella would no longer give her any trouble. So I said goodbye, and we all parted. I relived the scene that night as I went to bed. I was a full-grown man. Was I so dumb at Una's offer? Could I have gotten a kiss, an embrace? Whatever it might have been, it probably could have changed my course to my detriment. The fact was that beautiful and attractive Una was separated from her husband and having trouble. I learned from my aunt and Marguerite of the many other friends who were either pining for their husbands, fighting in the forces, or separated from husbands, or seeking divorce. The raging war was playing havoc among these women. So you give a good explanation of what they were suffering at that time, how people lived. It was good that you included these anecdotes in your book. Then you finally get to go to Radio City Music Hall, and you explain you also went to the New York Public Library, and you saw various collections and the Herman Melville's Moby Dick. You saw the original and various types of publications. You then went to the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, the Polo Grounds. You went to Rise Park, Wall Street, all various places, and you describe your time there. Then you get to go to Radio City Music Hall. You also see the Statue of Liberty, the Bowery, the Cathedral St. John's the Divine, Graymore Garrison, various the cloisters and so forth. This time, the Aubreys, the Swabies take you. I think they take you.
The Swabies, right. Oh my!
You went to see the Easter Show in 1945. We see the Rockettes, and you see they were dancing to the theme song, "I'm Beginning to See the Light."
Beginning to see the light.
Popularized by Ella Fitzgerald. I kept humming the tune long afterwards. The movie was Without Love, starring Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. And then you talk about many years to come when Helena graduated from FIT and they used Radio City Music Hall as their venue. You recall that here. So you finally went in 1945, and then when your daughter was born, then she graduated from Helena. When Helena she went to FIT,
yes.
And her graduation was at the Radio City Music Hall. So you mentioned how you finally got to go. The first time you tried to go was in 1944, but you had to go to the bathroom, so you missed that. You go back to New York the second time. Now you get to go to Radio City Music Hall for the first time, and you're reminiscing now of when you went there a third time, this time when Helena was graduating from FIT. They graduated on the stage of Radio City Music Hall. So Helena went to FIT. You see if you remember. So yes, so you finally got your desire, and then they took you to see Barnum and Bailey Circus. You went to see that on the 20th of May, 1945.
Yes.
You were a witness. You went to see and you talk about how the John Ringling was such a genius with transporting the circus that Adolf Hitler sent spies to try to learn how he ran the circus, so he could learn how to move troops around. Then you explain how you went to Times Square on Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. And you were working, but then prior to that, though, Roosevelt had died in May. President Roosevelt died May 8th, 1945,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And then a month later, the victory in Europe was declared. So the war comes to an end in Europe. It's still continuing in Japan, but now Europe comes to an end. And you mentioned how you were in the crowd precisely on the hour, 9 a.m. The din commenced all over the city. Ships anchored or sailing in the river started to blow their horns. Cars tooted constantly. All work stopped. Workers crammed the windows to peer to see the spectacular skyline of Manhattan as tears of joy streamed down their faces. I left Long Island City, that's Long Island, around 11 o'clock in the morning, and we went to Times Square, where an estimated 600,000 people were present. And you remember seeing a tall Native American dressed in his costume, stretching his hands to the heavens.
Yes. Yes.
He intoned a supplication as he turned to face the east, west, north, and south. Children in their curiosity gathered around him as a movie cameraman brought his camera to bear on his every move. So you saw that. You spent the evening there, and then afterwards, it was when things died down, you went to the Loew's Criterion Theater to see Salome.
Salome.
With Yvonne Di Carlo. I emerged from the cinema 2 hours later. The rain was falling and the crowd had dispersed.
Memory.
Yeah. And then you go on to describe what happened after the celebration. You then describe going to the Museum of Natural History, and I was able to research the machine they used to show the stars. You mentioned, you called it, it was the German-invented Zeiss instrument. And I found out that instrument that you saw was created was installed in 1935, before the war. And then, of course, the war comes along, but with Germany. But fortunately, they had this machine before the war started, so that they were able to benefit from the latest technology, which the Germans had at that time. So that was the Hayden Planetarium. You visited the Hayden Planetarium. Dave took you. He would take you around on weekends. He would drive you all over the place. He was quite very accommodating. And Dave, he would drive in his car.
Yes.
Right. He would take you on weekends to various places. And you talk about where a rhinoceros was given as a present to the King of Portugal, but it capsized the ship and sank the ship. All these things were things you learned along the way. You saw the whale that was suspended, an artificial whale that you thought was real in the beginning. And then you saw the human body with the circulatory system, and you described the exhibits, the Asiatic mammals, the John Burroughs exhibit, the Theodore Roosevelt Hall, alarmist. Let me see, where's this one? Yeah, you give a good description, Dad, of what goes on. He described at the end of the Hayden Planetarium the light show, with the light turning to day, the coming of the rising sun, the Star-Spangled Banner was sung and ended our visit. I must draw your attention to the huge whale suspended from the ceiling. I wondered at the time just how could they have gotten this monster into the building. I was to learn the answer later when I read the book Under a Lucky Star by Roy Chapman Andrews, who was at one time in charge of the museum. He told of his life and work at the museum and how the whale had been gotten into the building. The whale was not a real one, but preserved by a taxidermist. It was not a real one, but was built as a lifelike plastic material and hung from the ceiling. Then you saw the William B. Whitney Tibetan alarmist collection, and so on and so forth. So you go into good detail about that. You mentioned about how one day you were walking Rockefeller Center and you saw someone in a mirror. You were looking in the store window, and over your shoulder was someone looked up just like you. Do you remember that? He was exactly like you. And then you turned around, and Dad, you awake? Yeah, Dad. Do you remember you were going in Rockefeller Center, and one day you looked into the store window, and behind you you saw your double, someone who looked just like you, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And you turned around to talk to him, but he disappeared. But that was, you explain how you encountered that individual walking the streets of New York. Yeah. So explain.
Saw a double.
You saw your double.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. You remember Hour of Charm?
Hmm?
The Hour of Charm, all-girl orchestra, Evelyn Kay and her magic violin.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, you used to listen to them on the radio in Jamaica, and now you get to see her at Paramount Theatre in New York City.
That's right.
There you go. So you get to fill all these wishes. Then you got to meet Reggie, Rosa, Jimmy, and Lillian, your cousins. Dave arranged for you to see all of them.
Yes.
And her daughter, Lillian's 13-year-old daughter, Dorothy. You met her at the time. It says here about Lillian. Lillian was a good looker, slim and shapely. She was reputed as a stand no foolishness girl. David told me of an incident where she had chased a Southern cracker off a train with her umbrella.
That's right. That's right.
She was the protective kind and seemed to have had a close allegiance to my brother Leslie.
Yes.
She was pleased to meet her baby cousin, which is you. And when she observed a button missing from my shirt, she quickly got her needle and thread and made it good. So she took care of you. Lillian lived to be 95 and was buried in Mount Vernon. Our call on Reginald, was on a Sunday night. We were running late. Reggie was the pastor of the Emmanuel Methodist Church in Harlem. We were able to catch him when service was over, just as he was about to leave. Jimmy, we caught on his way to an appointment, so our meeting with him was brief. I learned that he and I worked at the same place, but he was in a different area. Jimmy was eventually to visit Jamaica 5 years later. Finally was Rosa. We met her at the end. It was at St. Mark's Place in Brooklyn was her home. And her friend visiting was Miss Ethel Clark.
Ethel Clark. Clark.
We were friends at school. I knew your mother years ago. She was your mother's friend. She was now retired. She was a famous singer, soprano. She talks about how she had to perform for a president of a South American country, and she had to swallow a fly while she was singing because she had no.
Yes, I was singing.
You
Yeah,
had to sing.
yes. Oh my,
Yes.
bring back memories. Oh my, oh my.
Then you described various scenes you saw in New York, and there are two here which are notable. There was a number of scenes I witnessed, some ugly, some just plain tragic, and one anxious moment of my own. One afternoon, as I walked along the busy and crowded 8th Avenue in Harlem, I suddenly saw ahead of me people being pushed aside as a man came running towards me. I quickly got out of the way to see the man being chased by a woman with a long butcher's knife in her hand. Her hair wildly flying, as she pursued her quarry with her shouting, "If you keep coming, I will kill you." As startled people got out the way, someone quickly grabbed her from behind and spoke reassuringly to her. She quieted down. The man was far gone. The ugly scene was abated from what seemed to have been a lover's quarrel. Another was on a Sunday morning as my cousin Dave and I walked along Lenox Avenue. This was an incident mixed with pathos and kindness. We looked across the street and observed a commotion going on at a doorway that opened onto the sidewalk. As usual was the throng of people on the streets, just out for a Sunday's stroll. The door opened and a pair of hands dumped a white girl onto the sidewalk and slammed the door shut. The poor wretched girl just slumped to the ground, helplessly staring at the crowd that by now had gathered to watch this strange episode. Although this was a heavily black area, there were hundreds of whites all mingling and walking together. For a moment, probably from shock. You hearing that? You hear it? Yeah. You hearing that? Yeah, you hear this story? Okay. So I told you this girl is put out on the street. Okay. For a moment, probably from shock, no one seemed to have comprehended that the girl was ill and could not move. Then came a black man with a peg leg. He hobbled to.
Oh God, I remember that. I remember that.
He hobbled towards the girl, bent over and tried to lift her. Suddenly a black girl darted to his assistance, and between them both they put their arms about her and carried her away. As I write this story so many years later, tears come to my eyes, as they do now. Yes.
Those are memories that I remember, so important.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you have the Cafe Zanzibar.
Cafe Zanzibar.
Cafe Zanzibar.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. You were coming home from work. You'd arranged Leslie and everyone. They were going to your brother Leslie and his wife and her two sisters, Doris and Thelma. And they had a friend who went along. And they said, you can't come to New York and not experience the nightlife of New York. So they arranged to meet you at the Cafe Zanzibar. You would come from work, and then you would come to the house, and then you would all go together. But you were running late, so they left, and you got home, and they were gone. So you now had to decide whether you were going to try and find them. So you managed to get on the subway, go all the way to Times Square to find them. And you went to one place which you thought was it. It wasn't it at all. And then eventually somebody directed you to the right place. So emerging from the subway to the glittering fairyland of Broadway, I found myself at what I thought was the cafe, but it found out it was not. But then you found your way to the nightclub. There, standing at the door, was a resplendent uniformed doorman who bowed politely and pushed two shiny, silvery doors for you to enter in. You could hear the titillating music, and immediately you bumped into a queue right ahead of you. Hold on. We finally got him to be quiet for the moment. Okay.
Oh my God. Oh, interesting story. to me at my time of life now. Oh, yes.
The house was completely sold out. I joined the line. You can't. You wonder if you're ever going to get in. So again, by taking the bull by the horns, Dad, you said, "Okay, I'm going to just go up the steps, even though there's this big line here." You could see a lot was going. Cab Calloway was playing his orchestra,
Cab Calloway.
and you wanted to dance. On impulse, I suddenly decided to force myself past the waiting queue to the top of the stairs, where a man was raising the bar to admit the patrons as seats became empty. I told him that my party was already seated, and I was late. He immediately lifted the bar and let me through. I stood for a moment, viewing the scene, searching for my party. At this moment, the color of my skin paid off. I came to learn while writing this recollection that the Zanzibar was opened as a successor to Harlem's famous Cotton Club, which had closed by the time I came to New York. The main difference between the two clubs during this era of segregation was that the Zanzibar accepted colored people as its patrons, which not only broadened its popularity but helped it attract the top acts of the day. I inquired of a passing waiter to help me find my party. He knew exactly and pointed me in the direction where they were, for in the crowd were only a few colored parties. Sure enough, there they were, comfortably seated at our table with a vacant seat waiting for me. The pleasure and surprise of their faces when they saw me I shall never forget. There sat my brother with his 4 female companions. He needed help. I had arrived. The party livened up. The midnight floor show had just ended and dancing started again. We could not leave until the last floor show at 2 o'clock in the morning. So you spent Yes, you were able to stay for the second floor show. So you got to see it twice. But the second time, a waiter gave you a closer view. And then you describe it was for $5. You could have all you wanted for $5, and then you would describe this is the program, the Zanzibar program, that has the menu. It also has lists all the different performing acts. So we have that program. I was able to put it into your book for you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. That's the back and the front of the
thing that interested me at the time.
Yeah. And people can see the reality. And Pearl Bailey, she sang, "Straighten up and fly right, straighten up and stay right."
That's right.
The Berry Brothers.
What?
The Berry Brothers, they were a performing group called the Berry Brothers. I think they're probably a tap dance group. Dorothy Salters, Cab Calloway, the Zanzibutes, Count Leroy, Thrill on Wheels, Bill Robinson. You saw Bill Robinson at an earlier show,
Yes.
Bojangles, not at the Zanzibar, but you did see him when you were in the United States.
At the time, things that was very important to me.
Yeah. Here you are at the Zanzibar. That's Leslie, his wife, and that's you sitting. That's you right there.
Yes.
And you were able to they took pictures of the table, so you were able to order this picture. And they sent it to you. You got a copy of this picture.
That's in New York.
That's in New York. That's the Zanzibar.
Yeah.
That's you at the Zanzibar Cafe.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Then we have VJ Day, the final end of the war, victory in Japan.
An important time.
Yep.
Time of history.
You certainly got the right time.
World War II. Oh man, and I'm a young man.
Yep.
And going through all these things.
And then you went to Times Square, to join the
That
celebrations there.
great day, Times Square.
VJ Day.
Yes, indeed.
And then, let's see, you went back twice. You went once, and then you went back. You went back early. You went first, and then you went home, and then you decided to go back again. So you went to Times Square twice that day for VJ Day. Realizing that this historic event was once in a lifetime, I told my uncle I was returning to downtown to witness what was happening in Times Square. My uncle, ever cautious, advised me to keep away from the crowds. Right? He was always that way. Right. My youthful exuberance nevertheless prompted me on. It was around midnight when I emerged from the subway. So you went way back into the night. At midnight, you went back to Times Square to find a crowd estimated at 2 million still there. Confetti and hugging and all kinds of stuff. Times Square was brilliantly illuminated, giving a replica of the Statue of Liberty in the square. I lingered around this great mass of humanity, some so tired of this all-day celebration that they just slumped to the sidewalk, others hugging and kissing ardently in a long embrace. I finally left the scene and entered the subway to arrive home at 2 o'clock in the morning. The following 2 days, the 15th and 16th, were given as holidays. Then you get your marching orders. Now that the war was over on all fronts, I knew that my time was running out. The repatriation of the American servicemen would be commencing. I had now come to love this wondrous city of New York and felt a part of it. I also felt it could have been divine providence that I was separated from my fellow Jamaican workers to become a loner in the city, to have met relatives I had never seen before and visited places I had heard of and read about, to fulfill a dream I had cherished for years. The expectancy of my marching orders, however, in no way dulled my spirits. I looked forward to returning home to Jamaica. I had worked hard both on the farms and in the war manpower industry, and I felt it was time to call it a day. I longed to see my parents and my home. I wanted to share my experiences with them and to rest. My cousin Dave had shown me the town and taught me many things. His and his wife's hospitality was overwhelming. There was, however, one place that I wanted to see, Coney Island. The summer was drawing to a close, so good old Dave obliged. It was on Labor Day that he and his wife Ethel and their friend Marie, and I went on our jaunt. Included was visiting the wax museum of Madame Tussaud. There were two models that remained in my mind. One was the notorious Snyder murder, depicted as it happened, the wife, Ruth Snyder, standing in her nightgown within the door, holding the lamp as her lover moved towards the sleeping husband, with axe raised to slay him on his bed. In reality, he was garroted, not axed. The other was Bruno Hauptmann, of the famous Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
That's right.
Sitting in his cell.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Remember all that, Dad? Yeah.
I, as a matter of fact, I have recorded certain things that should be recorded.
Yeah, you go. Yes, you have a wide recollection here. Before the month was out, I came into work one afternoon to start on the 4 to 12 shift, and there waiting for me was my marching order. The foreman handed me a letter dated September 11th, 1945, and I have a copy of your letter there that you got. And it read, in compliance with the regulations laid down by the War Manpower Commission regarding the laying off of foreign workers and terminating their contracts with us on a 5-day notice, this is to inform you that on September 18th, 1945, your services will no longer be required.
Important.
Will be no longer required. Very truly yours, the National Sugar Refining Company, Joseph J. Dykes, Personnel Manager. P.S. Boat to leave New York City for Jamaica, British West Indies, on or about September 20th, 1945.
Very important.
You were to take 2 pieces of luggage.
Took how much?
2 pieces of luggage, that's what they said. But that didn't work. You took more than that. So then you spent the next day, you described you're preparing to leave now. and you had accumulated so many things on your trip. I spent the next 2 days packing and taking leave of relatives and friends. I had received gifts from relatives and friends over and above my needs, gifts I could distribute to relatives and friends on my return home. You had to buy a large trunk. You needed so much stuff. You needed so much space to carry all your items. And then we show how, how much pay you received and your savings. We have all that information here. And then we have the trip home, and as I showed you before, this is the Louis McLean.
Louis McLean.
That's the ship that you went on.
Yes.
When you returned to Jamaica.
Here's the ship.
Right here.
Yeah, the Louis McLean. Yes.
Yep. I was able to find that picture. And so now you ended up packing 10 pieces of luggage. You started out, they said only to take 2, but they ignored that. Yeah. They couldn't stop people from taking stuff back. So you ended up packing 10 pieces of luggage on your trip back. You started in America with 2 and you left with 10. Mm-hmm. When we reached the fruit company, pier number 3, the Louis McLean awaited us. The Red Cross had set up a canteen on the pier, and the kindly ladies were serving coffee and cakes to the men. The luggage was excessive, ignoring the completely specific order. A shut-eye was given this by the authorities, who knew quite well that under the circumstances there was sure to be a breach of this 2 luggage requirement. Mm-hmm. So you were all aboard. You eventually got aboard the McLean by 11:30 in the morning. And your particular berth was number 59, section B2. That's your landing card that you had to get on the ship. That was your boarding pass.
Interesting. I took photographs of these.
No, you have this.
Yeah.
I have it. I have the original. I took a picture of the original. You have this. We have this real actual item. Now the gangplank is being lifted, and it's time to go. And as you are leaving, you are reminiscing. As I looked out over the waterfront, I thought, what a difference the months had made. All the experiences gained.
A man going, as I know, walking on his street.
Right.
And I shouted him.
Shouted him. He didn't recognize you, but yes, you mentioned yes.
What
He looked around, but he couldn't find you. He couldn't recognize
Yes.
you.
What was his name again?
Lamar.
Eh? Lamar. Mr. Lamar. I shouted him and he stopped.
Right.
And looked back.
But he didn't see,
Yes.
he didn't see you. Yep.
Mr. Lamar.
Mr. Lamar.
I give him a shout. Mr. Lamar. He stopped. You shout him.
Yeah.
And he turned around and he looked up.
Look, but he couldn't see you.
And he walked off. Mr. Lamar. Oh my. Bring back memories to me. I was leaving America. Oh my. Mr. Lamar. I see him now stop and turn back and looking, but he couldn't see
Couldn't
me.
see you.
And he went on.
A few
Mr. Lamar, which is dead gone long ago. Oh my end in America after the war.
I looked across the pier and saw a familiar face of a person striding quickly away in the opposite direction. It was Mr. Lamar, the refinery's personnel manager, who would receive me on my first day at the works. I hailed him out of the crowd to say goodbye. Hearing his name, he looked but could not recognize me in the crowd of faces marching along to the ship. He had done his job, and he was hurrying off the pier. Yeah. The good impression. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was to return home after the war.
Yeah. The good impression made by the Jamaican war workers in America, in many cases, made the American employer reluctant to dispense with their services, and many workers lingered on. Some even returned to live permanently in America at the sponsorship of their former employers. This set the stage for the continuation of the farm worker program throughout all the years following 1943 to the present, whereby seasonal Jamaican farm workers year by year have returned to the United States to work. This project has even extended into Canada. I moved away from the ship's rail and strolled about the deck. A face here, a face there, this one and that one looked familiar. Was it from the Cuba? Was it from Elba? I had lost track. It was now 2 o'clock and we were still at the berth. We were becoming hungry. The Red Cross, from whom we had received our coffee and cake earlier, had long since packed up and gone. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the news got around that the cook had skipped ship and that they were searching for one to replace him, so they didn't have a cook. Luckily for me, before I left home that morning, Granny had prepared for me some fried codfish and crackers to take
That's
with me.
right, Granny. Granny, dear old Granny.
This appeased my hunger over the hours we waited. This kind thought was typical of Granny. It was around 7 p.m. that the McLean finally pulls away. And you pass the New York skyline and you see the Statue of Liberty as the Big Apple receded in the distance. As we passed through the Narrows and shortly after disappeared completely from view, we were at sea. Then you describe your life on the ship, the people you met coming back, and you talk of, I learned that some of them had come as far away as from Connecticut to get on that ship. A few were from the first batch in 1943 who had sailed on the Shanks to New Orleans, and from where they had traveled by train to Camp Connor in Connecticut and worked on tobacco, pears, apples, etc. in Connecticut. And this was for some of them was their first time going home. Our voyage was a pleasant one. To see any and finally you saw in the distance a little speck of light. To see any semblance of land after days on the open sea is always thrilling. Anxious to know what country we were passing, I inquired of a ship's officer who said we were passing Watling's Island, Bahamas, not to be confused with an island of similar name in Bermuda. You remember Watling Island? Okay. I imagined the speck of light in the distance had been like the sight that Columbus first saw of the New World when he sighted what the natives called Guanahani, now named St. Salvador by Columbus.
That's right.
Right. The island is argued as the place Columbus first set foot in the New World. When the English took over the island, the name Watling, a pirate who named it for himself, was applied and still held vogue along the official name of San Salvador. I kept my eyes on this speck of light until it faded away in the blackness of the night, and then we went down to bed. Before leaving Jamaica, I had often heard from those who had traveled to return to Kingston Harbor after a day at sea was one of the most beautiful sights to behold. This indeed was no exaggeration. For on the morning of Thursday, the 27th of September, 1945, we awoke to see the impressive blue mountains towering in the skies. The McLean rounded Port Royal, and in no time we were at our berth. And then you describe how you go through the customs and how you came across Barry Wallace.
That's right. Poor old Barry.
I moved across the deck to the larboard, which is the port side, and saw a customs launch circling the ship. Standing in the prow was the customs officer in his start uniform. I immediately recognized him as Barry Wallace, a family friend and co-worker with my brother Herbert in the customs department. The launch veered away out of sight around the stern of the ship. I left the rail and went below to escape the heat. So now we had arrived, you arrived at 8 o'clock, but it wasn't until 9 o'clock that night. You spent almost all day, 9 o'clock that night before you began to leave the ship. You were the first batch. My batch aboard the McLean was the first batch to arrive home from Jamaica. Our batch was unprecedented in many respects. Jamaican workers previously over the years had returned from Cuba, Panama, and elsewhere with their belongings, but never before was there the quantity of luggage as the men now returning from America had. Almost all the 400 men had one or two large trunks plus suitcases, etc., etc., etc. Our delay on board was due to the excessive luggage to be unloaded and placed in order to be inspected. This was going to be a long night as men began opening their luggage to customs officers for inspection. Right behind me in line was a friend I had made on the ship. And as we approached the desk for our inspecting officer, I caught sight of Barry Wallace, okay? And he was inspecting along. And when he saw you, he said, "John, I didn't know you had gone to America."
That's right, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And then you turned around and said, "This is my friend," to the person behind you. And Barry said immediately to the officer, "Don't open their luggage."
That's right.
And went on his way.
Barry Wallace.
And he came to visit. Right. And he came to visit us.
Returned to Jamaica.
Right. And he came to visit us in England some years later.
Oh my.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm now 103 years old. Oh my God.
Yeah.
103 years old I am now. And all these people and all these incidents happen.
Yeah. Overnight, I had become quickly acclimatized to the heat. The whole night was spent in traveling, but I felt no sign of fatigue.
Oh my.
Hold on. You found a truck driver who dropped you off at Runaway Bay. You then sent.
I remember that. That's right.
And you were there, so at the morning, the telegraph office opened at 8 o'clock in the morning.
And Kathleen get a telegram.
Right, you telegrammed your sisters to come fetch you.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, that me never remember.
And they came with a friend, right? So Kathleen picked you up.
Yes. I see my father come over the veranda, no smiling to welcoming me.
In response,
and I come out of the car. The fella who came for me was a half Chinese man in St. Amber with a shop. I forget his name. Come and pick me up. I run away Bay. Oh, after the war, those of us in St. Amber were dropped back exactly where they picked us up.
Yeah, same place, yes.
Exactly where we were picked up, going to England. They drop us right back at Runaway Bay.
In response to my telegram, within the space of 2 hours, my sister Kathleen arrived in a taxi. My father and mother were waiting for me on the veranda.
That's right.
2 months after my return, my father passed away.
That's right.
It was as if he was waiting for me to return to bury him. Reflections. As Marguerite with her 2 grown daughters and I with my wife and 4 grown children stood to take leave of my Uncle Jocelyn's remains at his last resting place in Woodlawn Cemetery, we embraced at parting. All the memories flooded back. I wondered what of the farmers with whom we had worked, Old Burr, Albert Marble and their wives. Mr. Earl Roth, of the president of the Historical Society, confided that he knew Mr. Albert Marble. He knew him.
Albert Marble.
And where there had been over 150 farmers, now there are only 10 left now. And here's a picture of Aunt Jocelyn and Muriel when you went to visit them with Helena and Emily. And that's Mom. That's Jocelyn right there. That's Muriel right there. Emily and Helena. You're right over here. And Mom
Well,
right there.
Michael, thank you for getting this book through.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting this book through. It's worth the while. Every Jamaican should get one. Oh,
This is
my.
what you would replace. That's how they reap the onions today, using mechanical means to reap the onions. I don't know if you can see that there.
Well,
Yeah, the onions here, they're back now.
they come back. I just Emily.
Yeah, Emily and Helena, yeah.
Yes.
And
You gave us a good chance to read my book.
so let me read the
What
last
date
part.
what date is today?
Today is the 10th,
The 10th.
Thursday. Today's Thursday. Well, let me read the last part of your book.
All right.
Okay? So you talk about, and what of the muck, right? Remember the muck?
muck.
The muck. All right, the muck. The Elba muck, as it is called, though extending well beyond Elba, is the result of the hard work of Italian and Polish immigrants starting in 1915 to claim 7,000 acres of drained land from 25,000 acres of swampland. The muck is still supporting the farms of Elba and environments, as it supported me and my fellow farm workers. So that muck gave you a living. Okay? And what of my fellow farm workers? Alfred Barrett returned to Jamaica shortly after I, and within the space of 2 years returned to live in New York City, where he got married. Near the time of the 50th anniversary of VE Day, Alfred died in New York. My eldest son and I attended his funeral. Ferdy, my cabin mate at Elba, did not come back to Jamaica till 2 years later. After some time, he returned to live in America, where he eventually died. Dead also are my other Elba cabin mates, Lawrence and Bing Barnett, who vanished into obscurity and was reported dead. And what of Gerald Blackett, Little Brown, Sidney Weston,
Oh, Louis.
Victor Carr,
Has he been crying?
Baba Tracy, all are gone. Whenever I return to Jamaica, I made sure to visit Bada, who we affectionately called Father. He was that kindly man who pulled me by the hand and placed me beside him in one of the only two comfortable coaches on the train ride from Trouthaw to Kingston, as we departed that day for America. Bada, always smiling and pleasant, in his 80s when I last saw him, was always a living memory. The pioneers who stepped aboard those first two ships in Kingston Harbor, Jamaica, in 1943, at the height of a raging war, and all those who followed, are they to be the forgotten reapers? History cannot and will not allow that. Though many are now gone, they are not forgotten. And is your book.
God is not forgotten, indeed, by me and you.
And at the end, I put a chronology of all the events, and I made notes of how I researched the book for you. So anybody wanting to know how the book was created, they can go here, and it'll explain all the places you went to, how we wrote, how we researched the book.
When you do business to your father, to your memory.
Well, this is for you, Dad, right?
God bless you,
Bless you.
son.
Thank you,
God
Dad.
bless you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
And I highlighted June 4th, 1944. That's the day you set foot on the United States. And I highlighted September 13th, 1944, your first trip to New York City. Two important dates.
Beautiful.
Yeah, two important dates.
Couldn't desire better.
I highlighted those in bold specifically so that they would stand out.
Hold the book there.
And I'll show you how we designed the front cover for you.
What is this?
I'm
The
go-
forgotten.
Yeah, Reapers of World War II. Gallant Jamaicans helped defeat the Axis powers by John L. McHugh.
Let me see. Let me read it again. Gallant what?
Gallant Jamaicans helped defeat the Axis powers,
Yes.
the forgotten Reapers of World War II. And what we did, we took the onion fields of Elba,
That's right.
and then we put the torch from the Statue of Liberty coming out of the onion fields to represent when you went to New York City.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. God bless you, dear.
Thank you,
God
Dad.
bless you. Oh,
you, Dad.
my. Indeed.
My pleasure, Dad.
It's an incident that should be remembered. And
It's
you-
going to be
you
remembered.
remember it.
And the last part, this is you. We took you. We could have put them when you were 100 years old. This is when you were 100 years old. To a little bit of background of who you are. And then, right, that was that there. And then we put at the end of the back of the book a little description of what people will find when they read the book. So yes, so
Read that.
this part here,
Yeah.
at the end. From the indispensable onion fields of Elba, New York State, to the glittering field of the Big Apple, John McHugh's The Forgotten Reapers spotlights the invaluable contribution that he and his fellow Jamaican war workers played in saving the crops of World War II America and in maintaining necessary industry and commerce throughout America's cities. Crossing U-boat infested waters, John and his fellow workers contributed more than just their backs and hands, however, but contributed their boldness and sense of equity to American culture. And with the cry, "Boys, this is it, New York City," many hoped to experience the American dream in the Big Apple. John was able to fulfill this dream when he finished out the war as a war worker in New York City. This memoir captures the work effort and the magic of America as seen from the war worker's perspective, and in doing so brings recognition that these workers are not to be seen as statistics in the logistics of fighting the war, but recognizable human beings who were integral to Uncle Sam's winning the war. So that's what we put.
Thank you, Michael. God bless you. God bless you.
And this being the first book, I wrote in the book for you. I signed it. And it says, this particular copy was presented to John McHugh on his birthday, 5th August 2023, at 7:30 a.m., Fort Pierce, Florida, by son Michael McHugh. And I put my
Thank you. Thank you. God bless you.
name there. And I'm going to add one thing to put there.
Dear Father. Yeah. Every Jamaican should read, buy this book. Buy this book. Every Jamaican should read that book. Tell you. That's history.
Yeah.
History.
And I added there, so yes, so it's
That's history.
right. I added that it was this particular copy was presented to John McHugh on his 103rd birthday, 5th August 2023 at 7:30 a.m. So yes, this is quite the history, Dad. And we have here our acknowledgements. It says, I give thanks to God that he has given me the years to be able to write my own story rather than have my story told by others. So God has given you the life to write this book.
Right. God bless you.
Right.
God bless you.
And then we give thanks to Mr. Earl Roth, who from the Elba Historical Society gave us information, and Miss Laurie Nanny, who is the president of the Oakfield Historical Association, and they all provided information. And my son, Michael Luther Anthony McHugh, whose profound devotion made this book possible. All right. And then we have your table of contents, of all the chapters in the book, a list of all the illustrations in the book, so you can always go look to see. Your preface, you wrote an introduction to the book when you first started in 1995, and then how we managed to finish it. And then I say here at the end, I said, as I worked with my father to fulfill this greatly anticipated completion, I was and am constantly impressed by my father's remarkable memory and his great effort in creating this memoir and his articulation of his story. It is a classic understatement to say that collaborating with my father, let alone with a 100-plus-year-old man, is my great privilege.
Now, what size type?
Okay, this is, the font is 12 point times Roman. 12 point is times Roman is the
12 point.
Yeah.
12 point type. Oh, small. Everything is explained.
Yes, everything.
Everything is explained.
You're in all your books.
It
I found all of your.
It will last hundreds of years if it's leave.
I've got all your original diaries, and put them and read through each one of them, compared each diary and
Very important
put it all together.
And thank God I live to see it.
You live to see it.
Live to see it. And look what your hand can.
Yes. My goodness, you could play the bagpipes there. Okay, Emily, I think.
How many pages?
It's okay. 257. 257 pages. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's a true book. And the illustrations, and shows everything. Yes, we just finished.
Stop recording?
I'm going to record it now. Would you like to say something to your father since we're still recording? We can edit. We'll be editing, of course.
Papa, who's going to be editing?
You appropriately finish reading
Papa!
the book for me. As no steps you did.
Congratulations, old John.
Oh, God.
Congratulations, old Michael. Well done.
Of course, okay. And that's Dad's original
The
book.
Forgotten Reapers of World War II. Gallant Jamaicans Defeat the Axis Powers.
Help defeat.
By John L. McHugh.
Yes,
Did you show Fluffy so the world can see who was barking in the background?
Come here.
Oh, my. He kept very quiet. He kept very quiet for his master to read this story to me.
Oh.
Yes. That dog kept very quiet.
I have him tied on.
Yes, I have him tied down.
Oh.
Oh, he went under there and turned himself around underneath. Unclip that. Okay. Yeah, I just wrapped it around. You can just unwrap it. I didn't tie it. Did I tie it? Yes, Dad. Yeah. So we're going to make sure that people know this book.
You always have a new look.
Yeah, they did quite a job. Thank you.
Quite nicely.
All right.
This is a little fella.
This is the co-editor who made sure to stay, who was underfoot while the editing of this book was taking place. This Mr. Fluffy. Okay.
Hello, good. Yes, oh my.
All right, Dad. Well, praise the Lord, and we thank God for giving us the ability and the means to complete this task.
Your mustache is gray. Your mustache is gray.
Yeah, no.
Look
Yeah.
here, boy. Look here, boy.
You want us to look at you?
Fluffs.
If your grandfather was alive, no, grandmother, to see this.
Well, we'll
Thank
see.
God.
We'll see them. We'll see them soon
Thank
again.
God, thank God, thank God.